They murdered my brother Morgan and maimed Virgil for life. The cowards struck from the shadows after we stood against them at the corral. I am Wyatt Earp, and I became the law when the law failed my family. The blood price they paid still echoes through the canyons of Arizona territory. I came to Tombstone in December of 1879 with my brothers and Doc Holliday, looking for opportunity rather than trouble. The silver mines were producing fortunes, and the town was growing faster than its own shadow. We were businessmen first, lawmen second. Virgil, my older brother, took the position of town marshal, while Morgan and I worked as deputies. We had our investments in gambling halls and mining interests. Life showed promise in this dusty corner of Arizona territory. Tombstone had a divided nature from the moment we arrived. The merchants, miners, and respectable folk welcomed law and order. They wanted to build something lasting amid the desert and mountains. Then there were the cowboys, not simple cattle hands, but organized rural gangsters who rustled Mexican cattle, robbed stagecoaches, and generally considered themselves above any law. The Clantons, the McLowrys, Curly Bill Brocious, Johnny Ringo, and their ilk ran wild through Cochise County with the tacit approval of County Sheriff Johnny Behan. Behan was a Democrat and political opportunist. I knew him as a man who wore his badge lightly and his loyalties even lighter. He courted the cowboy faction for their votes and turned a blind eye to their crimes. We had clashed over a woman once, Josephine Marcus, which did nothing to improve relations between us. But our real division was more fundamental. The Earps stood for law. Behan stood for whatever served Johnny Behan. My brothers and I lived in a modest house on Fremont Street with our women. Virgil was steady, the most experienced lawman among us. Morgan was the youngest, good-natured and loyal to a fault. James, our oldest brother, kept to his own affairs mostly. We were close, sharing meals together almost daily, watching each other's backs in a town that grew more dangerous by the month. Allie, Virgil's wife, kept house for all of us at times. My common-law wife Mattie suffered from headaches and laudanum. Dependence, though I spent increasing time with Josephine. We were a family unit, bound by blood and trust in a place where both were valuable commodities. The trouble built slowly, like storm clouds gathering over the Dragoon Mountains. The cowboys resented our interference in their businesses. We shut down their gambling operations when they refused to pay taxes. We arrested their drunken compatriots when they fired weapons in town. We investigated their stagecoach robberies. Each encounter added to their hatred. Ike Clanton was a loud-mouthed coward who talked bravely when surrounded by friends or filled with whiskey. His brother Billy had a similar disposition, but more nerve when cornered. The McLowry brothers, Frank and Tom, were their close associates, ranchers who asked few questions about the cattle that passed through their hands. They all rode with the cowboy faction that considered Tombstone and the surrounding county their personal domain. Doc Holliday complicated matters further. My friendship with Doc raised eyebrows even among our supporters. He was a dentist turned gambler, suffering from consumption, quick with a knife or gun, and possessed of a medical education that made his wit all the sharper. The cowboys hated him particularly, and he returned the sentiment with interest. He stood with us through it all, loyal beyond reason or sense. The early conflicts were minor. Threats in saloons, confrontations on dusty streets, newspaper editorials questioning our methods and motives. The cowboys grew bolder as 1881 progressed. They robbed the stagecoach from Benson, killing the driver. Evidence pointed to their involvement, but witnesses grew scarce when questioning began. The pattern repeated with depressing regularity. Crime followed by obstruction, with Sheriff Behan constantly undermining our investigations. Mayor John Clum supported us through his newspaper, the Tombstone Epitaph. Other businessmen stood with us as well, seeing the cowboys as a threat to the stability needed for commerce to flourish. We were not alone, but we were marked men nonetheless. The divide in Tombstone grew wider with each passing month. Something had to break. We all felt it coming, like the charge in the air before lightning strikes. By October of 1881, threats against us had become commonplace. Ike Clanton proved particularly vocal after a failed scheme involving reward money for capturing the Benson stage robbers. He believed Doc and I had betrayed him, though the truth was he had betrayed himself through loose talk and cowardice. On the night of October 25th, he prowled the streets of Tombstone drunk, armed with a rifle and pistol, despite town ordinances prohibiting such weapons. Virgil and Morgan confronted him, disarmed him, and took him to court, where he was fined. His humiliation was complete when I followed him to the Grand Hotel and slapped him repeatedly with my pistol after more threats flowed from his whiskey-soaked lips. He left town vowing revenge, his face a mask of hatred and embarrassment. The next morning brought news that Ike had returned with his brother Billy, Frank and Tom McLowry, and Billy Claiborne. They gathered at the OK Corral, armed despite the town ordinance. Virgil received reports that they were threatening to kill us on sight. As town marshal, he could not ignore such a flagrant violation. He deputized me and Doc Holliday, then summoned Morgan to join us. The four of us walked down Fremont Street toward the corral, our coattails flapping in the cold October wind. Sheriff Bean intercepted us, claiming he had disarmed the cowboys. It was the first of many betrayals to come. He knew they remained armed and dangerous. He chose to protect them rather than uphold the law. We continued past him, turning into the narrow lot near the corral where the cowboys waited. Virgil called out to them to throw up their hands. Instead, they reached for their weapons. The gunfight lasted only 30 seconds but changed everything. When the smoke cleared, Billy Clanton and both McLowry brothers lay dead or dying. Ike Clanton, true to form, had fled at the first shot. Morgan took a bullet across his back. Doc suffered a hip graze. Virgil caught a bullet in the leg. I alone emerged unscathed. Sheriff Bean arrested us for murder before the bodies were cold. The preliminary hearing lasted nearly a month, with Judge Wells Spicer eventually ruling that we had acted within the law. The cowboys were enraged. Their newspapers called for our blood. Their friends in county government sought indictments. The lines were drawn more clearly than ever before. In December, just weeks after our vindication, they struck from the shadows. Virgil was walking home from the Oriental Saloon late at night when shotgun blasts erupted from a building under construction. The heavy buckshot shattered his left arm, leaving it permanently maimed. He survived only by chance and constitution. The evidence pointed to Ike Clanton, Frank Stillwell, Hank Swilling, and others from the cowboy faction. Sheriff Bean made a show of investigation but produced no arrests. We moved Virgil to the relative safety of the Cosmopolitan Hotel. Guards were posted. Our wives took turns tending his wounds. I wired for James to come help protect our family. The town divided. Further, with some citizens forming a vigilance committee to counter the cowboy threat. Cochise County became a powder keg with a burning fuse. For months we lived under constant threat. Morgan and I continued our law work and business interests while watching over Virgil. Doc remained close, his loyalty unwavering despite the danger. We received word that Ike Clanton, John Ringo, and others had been overheard planning further attacks. They were determined to eliminate the Earps entirely from Tombstone. Sheriff Bean continued his pattern of interference and obstruction, protecting his cowboy constituents at every turn. On the evening of March 18th, 1882, Morgan and I enjoyed a game of billiards at Campbell and Hatch's saloon. Our guard had relaxed somewhat after months without incident. Morgan was chalking his cue and laughing about a shot I had missed. The back door of the establishment faced an alley with a view into the billiard room. A shot rang out from that direction, followed by several more in rapid succession. Morgan cried out and fell across the billiard table. The bullet had entered his back and torn through his body. I carried him to the doctor, his blood soaking through my clothes. He looked at me with fading eyes as life slipped away. He told me it hurt, that he could not feel his legs. Those were his last words. My brother died in my arms at age 30, his only crime being an Earp in Tombstone. The evidence again pointed to the cowboys. Pete Spence, Frank Stillwell, Florentino Cruz, Indian Charlie, and John Ringo were implicated by witnesses. Yet Sheriff Behan produced no arrests. No meaningful investigation occurred. The cowboys had escalated from maiming to murder, and the law of Cochise County, in the person of Johnny Behan, stood with the killers rather than the victims. The pretense of legal justice died with Morgan. His body was not yet cold when I made my decision. I would take Virgil to safety in California, then return to hunt down each man responsible. Not as a lawman bound by procedure and evidence, but as a brother with a blood debt to collect. They had declared war on the Earps. I would show them what war truly meant. Emotional aftermath. We loaded Virgil, still weak from his wounds, and Morgan's body onto a train bound for Tucson, the first leg of the journey to California. James accompanied them, along with the women. Doc Holliday, Warren Earp, Sherman McMaster, Turkey Creek Jack Johnson, and Texas Jack Vermillion rode with me as guards. We had received word that cowboys planned to intercept the train in Tucson to finish what they had started in Tombstone. The weight of Morgan's death pressed down on me like a mountain. I had seen men die before, had caused deaths when necessary as a lawman. But holding my younger brother as his life drained away changed. Something fundamental within me. Grief gave way to a cold rage unlike anything I had experienced. My thoughts focused to a single point. The men responsible would pay with their lives. No court, no jail, no mercy. We reached Tucson near midnight. While the others guarded the train, I stepped onto the platform to scan for threats. Frank Stillwell and Ike Clanton were there in the shadows, just as our information had suggested. They fled at the sight of me. I pursued Stillwell down the tracks, my shotgun heavy in my hands. When I caught him, he begged for his life. I remembered Morgan begging for the pain to stop as he died. The shotgun roared twice in the desert night. Frank Stillwell became the first debt paid. We continued to California, seeing Virgil and the others safely to our father's home in Colton. I kissed Mattie goodbye, knowing I might never return. Some part of me recognized this as the end of our life together, though neither spoke it aloud. Her laudanum haze perhaps made the parting easier. I told our father I was returning to settle affairs in Tombstone. He knew what I meant without details being necessary. The old man had buried too many sons already. Upon returning to Tombstone, I found warrants for our arrest in the Stillwell killing. Sheriff Behan seemed suddenly capable of swift action when cowboys were the victims rather than the perpetrators. I ignored the warrants. My badge no longer mattered. The law had failed my family repeatedly. Now I would become a law unto myself, operating by older, simpler rules of vengeance and blood. Doc and our loyal friends gathered supplies and ammunition. We rode out of Tombstone as a group that newspapers would later call the Vendetta Posse. I preferred to think of us as instruments of overdue justice. My grief had crystallized into purpose. Every hoofbeat on the trail seemed to echo Morgan's name. Every campfire reminded me of evenings spent with brothers now dead or maimed. Sleep came rarely and brought no rest when it did. We received information that Florentino Cruz, another suspect in Morgan's murder, was hiding at Pete Spence's woodcutting camp in the Dragoon Mountains. The next morning, we surrounded the camp. Cruz attempted to flee but fell to our rifles. Before dying, he confirmed our suspicions, naming the other conspirators in Morgan's death. His confession brought no satisfaction, only confirmation that our course was necessary. The territorial governor declared us outlaws. Newspapers printed wild accounts of our activities, some true, some fabricated. Rewards were offered for our capture. Former friends in Tombstone disavowed us publicly while sending private messages of support. I cared for none of it. The only reality that mattered was the hunt, the relentless pursuit of those who had destroyed my family. We moved through the San Pedro Valley like avenging spirits, receiving information from sympathetic ranchers and prospectors. Cowboys fled at rumors of our approach. Those associated with the Clantons and McLowrys found no welcome at previously friendly ranches. The balance of fear had shifted in Cochise County. For the first time, the cowboys understood what it meant to be hunted. We established a camp in the Whetstone Mountains, centrally located for our operations. Doc Holliday proved invaluable despite his worsening consumption. Between coughing fits, he helped plan our movements and maintained our weapons. Sherman McMaster, a former cowboy himself, provided intelligence on hideouts and trail signs. The others contributed their skills in tracking, shooting, and remaining invisible in hostile territory. Each morning began with coffee and strategy. We identified likely locations for our remaining targets. Curly Bill Brocious operated from the area around Iron Springs. Johnny Ringo frequented the caves near Galeyville. Indian Charlie had connections with the reservation Apache and might seek sanctuary there. Pete Spence had surrendered himself to authorities, ironically finding jail the safest place to be. We needed supplies that could not be requisitioned from friendly ranchers. This necessitated careful trips to settlements where Sheriff Behan and his deputies were less likely to be present. Turkey Creek Jack Johnson handled most of these expeditions, being less recognizable than Doc or myself. We maintained a constant rotation of scouts and lookouts, knowing that cowboys would sell information about our whereabouts to Behan, or worse, set up ambushes. The territorial newspapers portrayed us as criminals, but many common citizens sent messages of support. Morgan had been well liked, and the cowboy depredations had affected many families beyond our own. We received information about enemy movements from stagecoach drivers, telegraph operators, and bartenders sympathetic to our cause. This informal network proved vital to our success and survival. Our weapons required special consideration. I carried a Colt Peacemaker revolver for close work and a shotgun for more definitive encounters. Doc favored his nickel-plated revolver and carried a knife as backup. The others had their preferences, rifles and revolvers primarily. We maintained them carefully, knowing our lives depended on their reliable function. Ammunition was stockpiled whenever possible, as were medical supplies for the inevitable wounds that would occur. Each night, I reviewed what we knew about the remaining targets. Curly Bill represented the greatest threat. A skilled gunman with numerous loyal followers, he had likely ordered the hits on my brothers, even if he had not pulled the triggers. Himself, Johnny Ringo, was dangerous in different ways, cunning and unpredictable. The others were lesser concerns, but still marked for justice. I committed their habits and known locations to memory, building mental maps of their likely movements. The legal authorities continued their pursuit of us with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Sheriff Behan organized posses, but seemed to find our trail conveniently cold. U.S. Marshal Crawley Dake, who had previously supported our law enforcement efforts, now had no choice but to issue warrants. We avoided both whenever possible, saving our ammunition and energy for more deserving targets. This was not a fight against the law, but against those who had placed themselves above it. Our informants brought word that Curly Bill and several cowboys were camped near Iron Springs. The location was ideal for our purposes, remote enough for our business to be conducted without interference. We would approach from the east, using the morning sun to our advantage. The ground offered good cover, with scattered rocks and brush to break up our silhouettes. Most importantly, escape. Routes existed should the encounter go poorly. Even vengeance required planning for survival. I felt Morgan with me as we made our preparations, not as a ghost or vision, but as a presence in my thoughts and motivations. I remembered teaching him to shoot when he was barely tall enough to hold a pistol. I remembered his laughter, his unfailing good nature even in the worst circumstances. I remembered the light leaving his eyes as he died in my arms. These memories hardened my resolve when doubts threatened to emerge. This was not murder. This was justice long overdue. The morning of March 24th dawned clear and cool. We rode toward Iron Springs, our horses moving quietly over the rocky terrain. Turkey Creek Jack and Texas Jack took flanking positions as we approached. Doc, still weak from his illness, remained with the pack horses as a rear guard. McMaster, Warren and I formed the main party. Our information indicated that Curly Bill and possibly 8 other cowboys were camped at the spring. The terrain changed as we neared the water, becoming more broken with large boulders and scrub oak. We dismounted to proceed more cautiously. I led the way around a bend in the trail and suddenly found myself facing Curly Bill Brocious and several of his men. They had been concealed by the rocks, perhaps alerted to our approach. Surprise registered on their faces, quickly replaced by determination. They reached for their weapons as I dropped to one knee. Curly Bill leveled his shotgun. At me, time seemed to slow. I could see his finger tightening on the trigger, the sunlight glinting off the barrel. My peacemaker cleared its holster as his shotgun roared. The pellets passed over my head, close enough that I felt their disturbance in the air. My return fire caught him squarely in the chest. He staggered backward, his expression one of disbelief rather than pain. He fell into the spring, the water turning red around him. The other cowboys opened fire from cover. Bullets struck rocks near my position, sending stone fragments flying. One caught me across the belt, tearing the leather but causing no real damage. I rolled behind a boulder as McMaster and Warren returned fire from their positions. The gunfight continued for several minutes, the valley echoing with reports from rifles and pistols. Johnny Barnes, one of the cowboys present, took a bullet in the chest from my rifle. The others began a fighting retreat, dragging Barnes with them. We maintained our fire to discourage any counterattack. When the shooting stopped, Curly Bill Brocious lay dead in the spring while the others had escaped into the surrounding hills. The most dangerous of our targets had been eliminated. The debt collector had made another withdrawal. We retreated quickly, knowing that the gunfire would attract attention. Our horses carried us into the Dragoon Mountains, where numerous caves and abandoned mining claims offered shelter. That night, we celebrated our success in grim fashion, passing a bottle while keeping watches. Doc suggested that Curly Bill had died better than he deserved, fighting rather than from ambush as Morgan had. I found I did not care about the manner of his death, only that justice had been served. News of Curly Bill's death spread quickly through the territory. The cowboys denied it had occurred, perhaps hoping to maintain morale among their diminishing ranks. Sheriff Bean increased his efforts to capture us, though whether from genuine legal motivation or fear for his own safety remained unclear. We continued our operations, moving frequently and striking when opportunities presented themselves. Our next target proved elusive. Johnny Ringo had gone to ground, possibly in Mexico or more remote parts of the territory. Informants provided contradictory information about his whereabouts. The smaller fish among the cowboys scattered, many leaving the territory entirely rather than face our vengeance. Pete Spence remained in jail, temporarily beyond our reach. The momentum of our campaign slowed by necessity. By April, pressure from the territorial authorities had increased substantially. Governor Fremont, responding to complaints from the cowboy faction and their political allies, authorized additional resources for our capture. We were portrayed as murderers in most newspapers, with significant rewards offered. Even our sympathizers began to withdraw support, fearing association with outlaws. The vendetta had accomplished much, but its time was drawing to a close. I received word through Sherman McMaster that arrangements could be made for our safe passage out of the territory. Influential friends in Tombstone, including the Wells Fargo agent and former Sheriff Bat Masterson, had negotiated with territorial officials. If we left Arizona, the pursuit would be minimal at best. The alternative was a continued life as fugitives with diminishing support and increasing risk. After consultation with Doc and the others, I agreed to the terms. We rode north, toward Colorado, separating to reduce the chances of capture. Doc and I traveled together as far as Albuquerque before parting ways. He continued to Colorado, while I doubled back to meet Josephine, who had remained loyal throughout the ordeal. We would eventually make our way to California, then Colorado, Nevada and beyond, always staying ahead of both legal consequences and cowboy vengeance. Johnny Ringo was found dead in July of that year in Turkey Creek Canyon. The official ruling was suicide, though rumors persisted that Doc Holliday or I had returned to settle the final score. I neither confirmed nor denied these stories in later years. The truth of Ringo's death remained between him, his killer, and the oak tree where his body was discovered. The years following our departure from Arizona brought changes I could not have imagined during those blood-soaked weeks of vengeance. Doc Holliday died of his consumption in Colorado in 1887. The famous dentist turned gunman, finally succumbing to the disease that had stalked him longer than any lawman or cowboy. I attended his funeral, one of the few times I risked returning to Colorado openly. He had stood with me when it mattered most. I would do no less for him. Virgil recovered as much as possible from his wounds, though his left arm remained largely useless. He served as a lawman in California and Nevada in later years, proving that the Earp commitment to order ran deeper than physical limitations. James and Warren continued their own paths, sometimes crossing mine, sometimes not. The bond of brotherhood remained, though geography often separated us. Josephine stayed with me through the decades that followed. We never officially married, but she was my companion and partner in all ways that mattered. Mattie, my former wife, took her own life with an overdose of laudanum in 1888. Her death brought both sorrow and guilt, emotions I kept private even from Josephine. Some debts can never be paid in full. We traveled extensively, following opportunities in mining, gambling, and real estate. Alaska during the gold rush, San Francisco, Nome, eventually settling for longer periods in Los Angeles. I worked as a consultant for the film industry in its early days, watching with bemusement as the events in Tombstone were transformed into entertainment for audiences who could never understand what really happened. The cowboys who had survived our vendetta met various ends. Clanton, the coward whose threats had helped precipitate the original conflict, was killed while rustling cattle in 1887. Sheriff Bean failed to win re-election and drifted into obscurity, his protection of the cowboys ultimately costing him public support. Others were killed in various frontier disputes or simply disappeared from historical record. My own reputation shifted with the passing decades, sometimes portrayed as a hero, sometimes as a villain, often as something in between. I gave interviews, occasionally in my later years, attempting to set the record straight, though newspapermen seemed more interested in gunfights than truth. The legend grew while the man behind it watched with increasing detachment. The Arizona territory that had witnessed our vendetta changed dramatically. Statehood came in 1912. Automobiles replaced horses on the streets of Tombstone. The frontier closed, then reopened as tourist attraction and mythology. The silver mines flooded. The boom went bust. The cycle of frontier economics played out as it had so many times before. Morgan remained with me always, not as a ghost, but as a memory that never dimmed despite the passing years. I saw him in young men on the streets of growing western cities. I heard his laugh sometimes when alone in mountain camps. The debt I had collected on his behalf brought no resurrection, no real closure, only the cold satisfaction that those responsible had paid a price. Justice served imperfectly in an imperfect world. When asked if I regretted any of my actions during that period, I maintained the same answer. The law had failed my family. The institutions designed to protect citizens had protected criminals instead. When such failures occur, men must act according to older codes of justice and vengeance. I had done what was necessary, what any man with similar resources and provocation would have done. The only regret was that such action had been required at all. I lived until 1929, long enough to see the Wild West transformed into mythology and marketed back to a population increasingly removed from its realities. The real Tombstone, the real OK Corral, the real Vendetta Ride existed only in the memories of aging participants, our numbers dwindling with each passing. History became legend, legend became film. Film became accepted as fact. My name endured while so many others faded. Wyatt Earp, lawman, gambler, avenger. The complexities of my life reduced to headlines and movie titles. Perhaps that is the fate of all who participate in events that capture public imagination. The truth lies buried with the dead, both those who died by my hand and those whose deaths I sought to balance through violence. The scales of frontier justice rarely achieve perfect equilibrium. I sometimes wondered what Morgan would have thought of it all. The quiet brother, the peacemaker, among us whose death unleashed such concentrated vengeance. I believe he would have understood. Family stood above all other considerations in our code. The badge, the law, public opinion, all secondary to the bonds of blood. The cowboys had broken that code by striking from ambush. We had restored balance. In the only currency they respected, blood for blood, a brother's debt collected in full.